Yeah, this guy came to me and asked me to photograph him because his psychiatrist had prescribed to him to do a nude photo shoot, and that was one of a kind. And
Prazer em conhecer. Is that good?
prazer em conhecer. Yeah, that's great.
I've been practicing my accent all morning. It's pretty much Portuguese and in an Irish accent.
So you're Irish, but you're not in Ireland right
No,
now,
correct.
or are you?
No,
Okay.
I live in Melbourne in Australia.
All right. All right. I see from the daylight there. Yeah.
Are you in Sao Paulo?
Yes, São Paulo.
What's been happening in your world?
Ah, oh my God. Trying to rebuild it after a few years of horrible management of this country. But yeah, trying to make it better right now. But yeah, welcome to Casanua. This is the place where I'm in the call from, in my living room, which is soon to become an NFT gallery. So that's what I'm excited about lately.
Oh, that's super exciting. And when are
Yeah,
you planning the launch?
we're probably having an inaugural event on end of September, but nothing's been announced yet.
Oh, it's soon.
Yeah, yeah.
How big is the NFT Web3 community in Brazil?
It's quite big in terms of amount of users, but there's some specificities in terms of the Brazilian community not being so well integrated into the overall like global community and where main things are happening, mostly as a side effect of the language barriers. So Brazilians are very early, like eager adopters of new trends and technology and stuff. Brazilians are the biggest communities in most social media applications that there are and stuff like this. But there is this problem, like, so it's great that people like build their own communities here, but on the other side of it, this is like a global arena and everything is interconnected, and the communities here are kind of isolated. So most of the NFT events that I go to here are sort of like disconnected to what's going on the rest of the NFT space, and I'm trying to, I want to try to help build those bridges, between these worlds and help integrate and stuff. So this entire Casanova initiative is also a small part of trying to do a little bit of this.
And is it mostly a language barrier, do you think?
Mostly, I think this is the most important one. Yeah. Because a lot of like 90% of Brazilians don't understand even like enough English to be able to read around on Twitter, let alone speak and stuff, and interact and sell your work or whatever in this space. It's not a trivial thing if you're not an English speaker. So yeah, it's a problem, especially because in the NFT space is very like it's the vanguard of technology and things that are happening. And most people who are building stuff here, like the truth is we have no time to actually like stop and let's think about inclusion and how to like we're including the people who are also like building at the front of things and stuff, but there's no time to let's stop and integrate the people who are being left out. Nobody's really caring about this. That's the harsh reality of it. So well, there's got to be some people thinking about it, otherwise like the gaps are only going to widen and stuff. So but all that said, there's like a thriving art community and like a lot of artists who are making work, like especially in the Tezos blockchain. There's a huge Brazilian community. The main Tezos marketplace, which like died a few months ago, but it was like really thriving, and that's what like brought the Tezos blockchain up to notoriety in the space. It was like a Brazilian built marketplace, which was Hicket Nunk. I don't know if you remember it. It was like the biggest marketplace until some time ago. So yeah, there's a thriving community, just lacking like more integration and more opportunities to really like be a part of the global space as a whole.
It's interesting because I've got quite a lot of Brazilian friends because I train Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So
Oh, cool.
yeah, so naturally I end up watching a lot of Brazilian artists and martial artists, et cetera, and speaking to quite a few. And yeah, English is never as transferable for Brazilians as it has been some other cultures, which is, in my experience anyway, which is an interesting phenomenon to watch, and it's a
Yeah.
good and a bad thing.
I don't know. Well, it's nice that we could all speak the same language, you know, and English is an easy language to learn, actually. Like, if everybody would have to speak Portuguese, it would be, or German, it would be much harder. So I don't think it's a bad thing that we have a common language that everybody can understand, but the common reality right now is that a lot of people around the world cannot speak English, and that's not just Brazil. Like, most of Asia doesn't speak like English. If you're talking about, like, you have India, which is a big exception because it was an English colony for a while, so that everybody learns English down there, but that's not a reality elsewhere. So
It's interesting because I have these thoughts in my head that the world's going through this massive homogenization where everyone's becoming the same through language, through everything, and it brings great network effect benefits for things like you're talking, but you run the risk of a massive loss of culture.
oh yeah, absolutely. That's a risk. Yeah. You have to take great care and consideration for preserving what must be preserved in terms of culture. And yeah, I see a lot of other like countries in Latin America, which are like culturally closer to the United States, for example. I see something like of what you're talking about when I visit these countries, and I see like American pop culture like permeated everywhere, and people forgetting about their own roots and stuff. Like, and I see that. I see what you're talking about when I realize, like, okay, let's take it easy, because there's a lot of richness in our cultures that should not be forgotten as well. But anyway, yeah, problems that we have to tackle.
You and I chatted briefly about it in DMs, because I studied Spanish myself for 7 years, and it was a very frustrating thing for me because it was harder for me to connect to people, I found, because I could never quite say what I wanted to say. I found joking to be quite difficult because things got lost in translation and nuance. I found that I maybe came across less intelligent than I was because I couldn't vocalize exactly what I wanted.
I know, it's we always get that impression, and especially about joking. Like, I was talking about this. I actually tweeted about this a few months ago. I don't know, because like I feel like I'm not entitled to make a joke because I'm not a native English speaker. People are already like expecting me to be more literal when I'm speaking English, and if I make a joke, like the chances, even if it's the same joke that another English speaker would make, the chances of me not being understood are higher.
I do not claim to be any sort of comedian, but I felt like my conversation and comedy was boiled down into slapstick. So physical comedy that I knew could translate cross-border, cross-language, and it's frustrating. How do you think? So we see so many, because of Web3, I've seen so many amazing emerging artists from literally across the globe. But with this lack of English, what difficulties? Well, you are probably not the best example because your English is fantastic, but what other difficulties do you see for emerging artists where English is not their first language?
Well, I think that, like, it's really, I think we're more and more coming to this place where it's an all or nothing thing. And I fear that we may have this kind of divide, you know, and pockets. Like, we're talking about a decentralized environment, but because of these barriers, which are like legacy barriers from a time before, and from an incomplete, let's say, like if we're talking about globalization, decentralization, etc., there are parts of this globalization that are incomplete, and that's not just about language, but about like geographical inequalities and everything. So I feel like we're rushing towards this kind of future that we're not where it's gonna end up, how it's going to be, but we haven't done our homework from before that, you know, in terms of giving everybody the same kind of access and opportunity to be a player in this new world that we're building. And I don't know, I'm not very optimistic about our chances of actually getting this right. It's I'm a proponent. I defend the freedom to transact, and I fell in love with this movement of decentralization. I feel like the most important thing that we're doing right now with this and with the memes is to fight for this open metaverse, not controlled by any corporations. But there's also the other side that comes with this like complete freedom, this like wild jungle where is everybody fending for themselves. This could maybe work if the level, like the playing field was level, and it's not the case.
I was having this conversation with a friend earlier that the more I understand it, the more I think we cannot go too far decentralized. We've just become too centralized, and we obviously need to make a move in the other direction. But I'm not sure the complete decentralization is the answer.
Yeah, exactly. We're finding out as we build. I guess. Yeah, that's where the real challenge is. Like just like in everything in terms of like public management and the part of the state. Like I'm far from being an anarchist, because I think the state has a very important part to play in terms of helping like secure this minimum for everybody to be able to participate in the free part of capitalism, you know, and we are far from getting there. So
and so on capitalism, when I was doing some research on your background, I was surprised to hear it, to be quite frank, that you've come from quite a strong economic and finance background. Can you give me a little bit of info on that?
Yeah, when I was about to choose my career, because that's like you're faced with this kind of decision that you have to make, and you don't even know anything about yourself. So as I didn't know anything about myself and what I wanted to do, I basically went to study business, because that's what people who don't know what they have. They don't have any calling in their life, so they go study business. So that's what I went to do. I actually I already had like my foot. I don't know if you have that expression in English, like to have your foot in somewhere, like to have my foot
in the door,
in the arts. And yeah, I had my foot in the arts. I was like I took part in some amateur theater groups as I was a teenager, but I didn't take it seriously, and I had no like artistic references. I had no artists in my close family. I lived in the countryside, so I didn't live in São Paulo. I didn't have the references that we have in the big city, you know, the cultural references and etc. So I didn't know that being an artist was really a possibility for my life, for myself. So at the time, I went to study business, and by the end of university, I was employed by a French company. So as soon as I got my degree, I went abroad to work, and I found myself in working for corporate trading, and I did that for 5 years. So there was a point when I started like finally questioning myself, and the irony of that is that because it was a former boss of mine in one of these companies I've worked for, and he was a very nice guy, and he sent his team members to do some like self-knowledge training and stuff like this, and people would resign after coming back because the thing was really good, and made us question what the hell were we doing to our lives. That's sort of what happened to me. I was living in Hong Kong and working there as a commodities trader for a multinational, transnational company. And I started hating more and more what I was like doing for the most part of my day. I was enjoying myself and my life and living abroad and, discovering other things that I liked. But the more I found myself in other places, the more I hated what I was doing for a living and, helping people and companies and projects that I didn't believe in, that I didn't trust in, helping them succeed and make money. That made no more sense to me. So I just I quit and I set out to find out what I was going to do for my life. I spent around 3 years experimenting here and there with all sorts of stuffs. And one of those things that I did, apart from some entrepreneurship projects, I participated in, founded some startups with former colleagues from university, but nothing that really sparked my passion or anything, except for when I went back to, I reached out to a theater company that I enjoy their works a lot, and did some workshops with them, and eventually landed on their permanent ensemble group for plays and stuff, and doing cinema. And that's where I found myself. That's where I discovered performance art, and the specific part of performance art, which is not yourself representing a character, but yourself putting yourself out there and realizing something, an action that provokes change in your environment, in yourself, in your viewer, whatever. That's the part that enchanted me, and that I saw that had the most profound impact on people who watched that kind of act. So that's what I fell in love with it and started studying and applying myself to it. And as years passed, I was since I found myself in that, not just in that artistic work itself, but also I found the people who I could really connect with, because I was completely disconnected from the people that I used to work with and interact with and go out with before, so I found my crew, I found my group, and I started naturally becoming that person who's building bridges and forming networks with these artists. And it's something that's completely detached from everything that came before in my life, because the art that we were making it was made with a purpose to send a message or to talk about issues that we as communities faced or as humanity face. And so it's never about commercial, never about selling. I only except for very specific experiences, I was only getting in touch really as putting your work out there as a product for selling when I met the NFT space. And so that's something different, to be able at one side to be able to make your work and find an audience and find collectors for it, but at the same time remain in contact with your essence about why you make your work, and not just make work in order to sell, because that's not where the motivation comes from in terms of being making art. So that's where I am right now.
I think if you're making art with a specific intent of selling it, you're effectively working for someone else again.
Mm-hmm. 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 It's just a different way. You're not being necessarily commissioned, but you're trying to forecast what's going to sell or please or appease, and that's a completely different thing. Yeah.
And I think what you said there will resonate with a lot of emerging artists around the finance piece. So when you decided that you wanted to go and chase your passion, you left, was finance a big concern?
I could make some money that helped me during these 2 or 3 years that I was like finding out my thing. But at the same time, I was confident enough, I think, that I could find a way, and find a way to survive. So yeah, I never had, as I started making art full time, I didn't have an expectation of making money from it, especially in Brazil, because like the art market is a very small thing for very few people. But I think the years that I spent in the business world like serve for something, because I can look around and know how to make money. Like, it's not a big mystery for me as it is. I know that it is for a lot of artists who have never gotten in touch with it. So yeah, what I set out to do is, for example, I started opening up a small studio, creative studio in the center of São Paulo. So that's where I start. That's when I start to grow some roots in this place here, and I start to make some money of it. And with the money that I make with the studio, I'm also able to like pay for my bills and keep creating other stuff that I like to create, and promoting these like cultural events that I also make in this space to like keep building these artistic networks, and throwing exhibitions and art fairs and stuff that try to like bring awareness to artists that don't have this kind of obvious knack or obvious market appeal for their work and stuff. Like, this is what really fuels me to keep doing and creating. I find myself naturally doing this uh, because it's so much fun. You discover, you network, you make contact with so many people, you get amazing feedback, and you see people that you got people to meet for the first time, and after a while they are collaborating and creating together, and you see their successes, and this is so fucking amazing. So
It's
yeah,
it's one of the only environments I've ever operated in where you produce a product or service and there's an element of shame on making a lot of money out of it. Even if we look at music, which is a similar artistic endeavor, there's absolutely zero shame in a musician making money from concerts, gigs, merchandise, streaming, whatever. But for some reason, the art community insinuates a little bit of shame on an artist making money, which I'm hoping through this podcast and other things to change.
yeah, you're absolutely right. I think there's this, and there's this like ingrained feeling that if the art is like meant to send a message, or if it's political in nature or whatever, it should not command financial economic value as well. So yeah, I hope it can be changed, but like, this is not something that's new from the NFT space. This is from before. It takes a lot of work, and maybe especially, I think, a lot of time for certain kinds of art to actually like get respected for what it's worth and what it can be worth, I think.
Yeah, and as I say, I hope they aren't mutually exclusive in the future, and I think NFTs
Yeah,
will help with that.
it does help, I think. Yeah, it does help, because there's a nature in NFTs, to quickly transform things into a market. But at the same time, you have to like keep, no, not exactly fighting against, but like, there's the trends all the time. The NFT market is so much about like, because it's all starts with collectibles, and trading these collectibles. And then you have the artists coming in because they see what's happening there, and there's a possibility and there's a market for them, and they come in, but they have to adapt to these trends and how things work, and the metas. At one time it's like one-on-ones, and then if you aren't doing collections, then you can't sell anything, and then it's editions, and then now zero reserve auctions or whatever. Like it's complicated to have to navigate all this, and and still like maintain sanity, especially if you're expecting to sell, to make a living off of it or whatever. Like I went through some hard times in the NFT space when I got into this, like, okay, I'm going to drop this and it has to sell, and if it doesn't sell, and you have to like keep trying and keep pushing, and everybody's like giving advice of how you should do this or that, and it puts you in a very bad place. And this is not what, again, this is not what art is about, at least not for me. So I could go back to a better place after I realized like that. Let me go back a few steps to the reason why I make art, and see the blockchain as a great medium for like minting art, as a way of registering what was created. It's here in the blockchain. Everybody can use it, everybody can see it, especially because I am a big fan of CCO, Creative Commons Zero, or public domain art. So most of my work is CC0, because I really like the fact that public domain art is is like a boon to the world. Everybody can grow from it, everybody can use it, and it just like moves us forward so much faster. Imagine if all the intellectual property around, especially when I'm talking about culture, if it's like on the public domain, humanity could grow so much faster. Imagine if all like the technology was being built with this mindset. And I understand why intellectual property rights exist, as an incentive for you to keep like building and investing and stuff. But at the same time, there's a layer of society, and I think the cultural layer should like especially fit there, where we could grow so much as humanity if we could all share what's we've been creating and let other people build on top of it. So I lost my train of thought right now.
No, I love
but,
it. Keep going. I love it. That's my favorite part, when people just start speaking. And CC0 is so important. And I think what you said on intellectual property is also very pertinent. There needs to be some form of financial incentivization for people to continue to innovate. So big pharma is another probably good example. There's a lot of hate towards big pharma, understandably so, because they make a lot of money in areas that they shouldn't. But if they do not have a financial incentive to do the expensive research, well, then the research stops and we get nothing. So we need to find a middle ground.
That's exactly. We have to find the ideal ground for each of these battlegrounds. In terms of big pharma, I would say, like, if the main goal is the health of the population, this should be being looked at by the state. This should not be in the hands of corporations. I don't think they invest the main amount of money that they invest in research is not actually exactly where it should be. But yeah, there has to be incentive, and some things are best left for the private sector. Some things are best left for the state. Some things could be in the public sector. And I think it's amazing that NFTs allow just that, allow a collector to see the value in that and pay for that work, but that work is made for the public. I think the meme lab piece that I did with the performance art piece, I think that's what, like, in terms of my NFTs, that's the one, Fight for the Freedom to Transact, is the one that mostly I'm very happy with it, because it brought me back to my like raw performance art time. I started my artistic career as a performance artist, and then from there I went to photography and filmmaking as a way of giving permanence to the performance acts, because the performance acts are live, they are public, they happen once, and even if you can like do it again at another time or another place, it's not going to be the same act as before, right? Each act is unique. And the only way of giving permanence to that is either by repeating it, but it's never going to be the same, or by like registering it in images. So with photography or filmmaking, still the end product, like the photographic image of a performance act or the filming of that performance act is not the same thing as the real thing. And that meme lab piece is the closest. Of course, like I put a soundtrack to it, and and there's a little bit of editing, but it's as close as I got in the NFT space to the raw performance act being registered and put out there as an NFT, and then it really comes full circle as it's auctioned, and the creator that created the character, the CC0 character that I used in the performance act, is the one that actually collected the piece in the end. That's our Sonic there that we're talking about. And it really comes full circle, and it shows like the power of blockchain and NFTs in terms of allowing a completely public piece of art, especially because it's a public performance act realized on the streets, and to actually like be valued and be collected and like stay forever there. Like it's registered, that thing happened and somebody actually bought it. But wait, what did they buy? Right? That's the right click save as guys questions, like what is it that you're buying, because anybody can copy it. Like, yeah, in that case it's not even like a JPEG, it's a happening, but it's possible to collect a happening. And this is mind-blowing. This is really cool.
It's so funny because the age-old argument is just that people will go to the Louvre to see Mona Lisa, but they could print it and have it at home. It's the provenance. But that's a whole other story, I'm sure. For
Yeah.
those that are maybe less familiar with your work, do you mind describing that piece?
Yeah, of course. So I took the opportunity that there was going to be the World Naked Bike Ride event in São Paulo in March this year, and I had the idea of taking the fight for the open metaverse to that place. I have a lot of my work deals with nudity and in many different ways, because most of what we see in terms of nude art, when we say nude art, people quickly equate it to like sensual female form photos and stuff like this. But there's so much more, not just in terms of contemporary work, but like throughout history. Nude representation is so diverse and has represented and has signified so many things throughout history, and there's power in that, and that's like it's obvious. There's all sorts of different reasons throughout history for how the human body has been used in artistic mediums and representation. So it's so interesting to study all that, and that's what I've been trying to do. I've discovered nude art when I was like coming back to performance art, and the power that the nude body has to tell a story, as a narrative tool. It's no wonder why, like on many public protests, you have people like taking off their clothes because it draws attention to their cause, regardless of what the cause is, because it's like it's a symbol of transgression, and at the same time a symbol of control. So like oppressive religions or groups or whatever, that like they need to tell you how you should dress and what you should cover and what you can show and etc., and how you should behave, because like the human body is essentially the quintessential like battlefield for control of human behavior. If you find out that you own, and you and only you own your body, and you can do with it as you please, you can ingest whatever you want or use the substances that you want because it's your body, or turn it into a piece of art however you want. This is a very powerful thought. And if this is a very powerful thought, it empowers you, and it's not very good for people who would like you to behave and be easily controlled, So I've been working with nude art in that sense, in terms of trying to explore all the possibilities that the body can convey in terms of narrative and telling stories and all that. So what I did for that piece, that coming back to it now, is I took the Sergeant Pepe character created by our Sonic, who the character became a legend in the space, and it's a aviator Pepe that carries the message of freedom to transact, and I printed this huge flag with the main freedom to transact meme by 6529er, and I took it out, took Sergeant Pepe butt naked to the main avenue here in São Paulo to run around with the flag and spread the message. So basically that was it. It was a lot of fun. It was also super hard. I meant originally to ride the bike, because that was the naked bike ride. So I meant to ride a bike carrying the flag, but as I got there, I discovered that I couldn't ride the bike and hold the flag at the same time because it was super heavy and it was windy. So I couldn't like balance on the bike. So I had to drop the bike with a friend that was close by and run all the way. I think that was 6 kilometers that I ran carrying that big flag. And it started to rain. We planned on filming it with the drone, also as a reference to my first meme card, because that was also shot with a drone. So we planned to reference that and shoot that with the drone. But what happens as it starts raining is that the drone pilot, he decides to risk it and keep filming when we start off. But the drone loses its signal and falls down to the street. So the drone was broken, lost. And so I got my man Paulo to hop on another bike and drive around filming from his phone, from his bike all the way. So that's what we did. I took every opportunity that I could. So I deviated and I was trying to follow the people with the bike, but they were like faster and I was running. I had these aviator boots that belonged to my father, and they're not comfortable at all. They're old, they're very hard. And like my feet were so broken at the end when I finished, but it was so much fun. And I was like completely painted in green as Pepe the frog, with the aviator hat and goggles and stuff. So I was going around and getting in the middle of people. It's a very crowded place. It was not so crowded because of the rain, but still I was getting in the middle of groups. There were religious groups like singing and stuff, because that's a very crowded avenue. It's like São Paulo's Fifth Avenue. And I would get in the middle of them and wave the flag in front of the banks and stuff like this. It was a huge experience. I think it had a great impact, and it was very well received because it's something that's different. And I think it's just a very small example in the end of how we can all do better in terms of spreading the message of the memes out in our real life world. That's something that I think every one of us could be doing more, because we spend too much time on these social media and Web3, and that's not even, we don't even have those like Apple glasses to spend all our days in the completely immersed in the metaverse. Imagine when that happens. I think if we gotta like win minds and hearts towards a cause, we should not forget this other side. It's super important. Otherwise, we're just like preaching to ourselves. How do we increase this space? How do we onboard 100 million people? How do we get more collectors to buy work? Because we're in a bear market, we have a lot of supply of art and not enough demand for it. I think it's time that we look outside a little bit more and take opportunities for this. Most of the people who saw the parade and me with the flag there, they didn't know what it was, but it sparked the conversation, and people were asking about it. What is it about? And I explained to the people from the naked bike ride about Like I gave a very quick explanation of what it meant and etc. And everybody quickly embraced the idea, you know? So I think the message that we're sending with Web3 and decentralization, it's a powerful one, and there's a lot of people who would be embracing this. But the very the things that come out of the NFT space, it's just like the bad things, you know. It's the scams and the rug pulls and all that shit that tarnishes the image of what we're actually building here and what the technology really means in terms of empowerment and you know, like taking control away from corporations and stuff. Like this cause could be embraced by so many more people than we have embracing the cause right now, I think.
I agree. And I've received probably 10 text messages this week with scam links for packages that I haven't picked up, so they say, but nobody's telling me to stop using text messages. Like, these things will exist across any medium at any time. Yep. So I think we need to be conscious of that as well. Just going back to what you were saying there a second ago about nudism being a sign of strength, and it has been. We've seen in sculptures for hundreds of years, probably predominantly more male than female, which is an interesting separate dialogue. But your exploration into nudism actually came at a time where you probably felt less strong. Do you mind, as much as you are comfortable, do you mind sharing that story?
Yeah. I think when I, as I was telling you the story before, when I quit my previous career and set out to find out what I really wanted to do, one of the things that I did was to go back to theater, because that's what I had started a long while ago. And that's also a moment where I was discovering who I am as a person, and discovering my sexuality, and discovering, you know, and in terms of discovering sexuality, the most beautiful thing that I could discover is that I didn't have to adhere to any specific, you know, boxes of what a gender and sexuality should be. So since then, I've enjoyed experimenting, and this has everything to do with how experimental my work is, and how every time I'm like trying out something completely different with what I'm doing. I think that's how I can make the most of this short time that I have here on this planet, is to like try out a lot of stuff and not have to conform to anything. So yes, with the first experimentations that I did with nudity were in that sense of trying to overcome whatever distorted images that I had of myself and my body and who I was. And also it impacted me strongly how this is an issue that everybody has at different levels, and people pay different levels of attention to it, but it's something that's part of most contemporary societies. Like the thing of not knowing how to deal with yourself and discover yourself, and these things are not like part of our education, you know. We're mostly left to discover ourselves and have nobody to talk to about any issues regarding our own body. So I was going through at a period, I was going through a very strong food compulsion disorder. And I spent a good time of my life. It's interesting because I spent a good time of my life just like on automatic mode, and not really making conscious decisions about what I wanted to do. So that's how I went to university to study business. And then as I finished university, I started working for that company because they made me an offer, and I just went, you know. And that's until I started realizing, okay, I haven't actually like stopped to think about any really decisions that I've been making so far with my life. But until then, I was kind of shielded. If you're on automatic mode, you don't reflect, you don't stop to think about it, and maybe you're content with whatever happens. the problem when you start to think and question is that you may find yourself to be completely lost if you don't find the answers, you know. And it takes a lot of time and practice and maybe like psychoanalysis and everything to realize that it's also okay to not have answers. Maybe you can find some answers. You can find some answers in this way, but you should also learn that you don't have to find all the answers, and being in search is a good place to be. But it's so fucking hard to realize this because you're not used to that. You're just living on auto mode, and when you're no longer there, you're no longer satisfied. You're no longer easily satisfied. So one of the things that happened to me was this food compulsion at the time, and I was like feeling lost and not knowing where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do, and questions about what is the purpose of my existence, what is the mark that I'm leaving, is it important, do I have to actually leave a mark, in this world. And this reflects this is for a lot of people one of the causes of addiction, and for me it was sugar addiction, and it was awful. I spent months without sleeping well and having headaches every day and getting sick all the time because I had no immunity anymore. And again, one of the ways that I found to deal with this was back to art. So I started dedicating myself to putting myself, and specifically like my physical self, my own body, in the center of my art, so that I could not escape from dealing with that fact, that I had to learn to live in this body that I'm in. So that's I guess that's how this became important, not just for others, because that's one of the things that motivates me, is the feedback that I get from people from the kind of work that I'm doing. Like, this is super important. I love what you do. It helps me. It helps me cope with my own issues and etc. But also, I do it for myself. If I learn that if I spend too much time without creating and putting myself in the center of this creation, I start like uh, uh, getting distracted more, and getting like far off from this place that interests me, which is this place of like discovering, being in myself and challenging myself, really to create, to bring something new. I slip back into that auto mode because you're overwhelmed with like troubles and responsibilities and tasks and everything that you have to do to maintain everything that you created so far. It becomes overwhelming at times, and so whenever I find an opportunity to go back to the, I wouldn't even say drawing board, because usually my creations, they happen so fast. Like, from idea to execution, it usually happens very fast. And that's what I love. I love putting things out there, even though I haven't like completely planned how they're gonna come out, because that's the risky part of performing arts that I enjoy the most. And I think leaving room for error, for experimentation, is an important part of what I do.
Mm. And you were saying there that you do a lot of this for yourself, but I know that hasn't always been the case. And you had an interesting story about a psychiatrist sending someone to see you.
Yeah. I have been photographing people, but I don't advertise myself as a commercial photographer that much. Luckily, like I have my stuff. Like, I have the studio, and I have this new place that I've built here, and I have my ways of like financing my activity and stuff. But I don't advertise myself as a photographer. But whenever somebody comes and looks for me to photograph them, I try to do it. And since I work a lot of nudity, some people look up to me and say, "Hey, do you do nude photo shoots and stuff?" And people have all sorts of different reasons for wanting to be photographed. But this guy came to me and asked me to photograph him because his psychiatrist had prescribed to him to do a nude photo shoot, and that was one of a kind. And I see a lot of people come with all sorts of fears, when they decide that they want to do it, and but this was different because it was a prescription from somebody else, and he really enjoyed it because it's always a great experience. You always discover something new. I always discover something new when I photograph a different person, or when I put myself out there for being photographed by someone else. And I think it worked really well for whatever the psychiatrist wanted him to
What was
overcome. I
the purpose from the psychiatrist? What was his rationale?
Well, he was dealing with issues of acceptance. It's this thing of acceptance of finding oneself, and he was depressed, and he had trouble with not exactly like body image troubles, but really of finding himself, finding his place. I don't know that many details because he was kind of like closed. I think he opens up that much more to his own psychiatrist, but I guess it worked. He was really happy with it, and in the end, he says like it became a common thing for the psychiatrist to recommend this for patients because it's a great experience for everybody. I think everybody should do it at least once, in their lives, to be photographed nude. I don't know if you've ever had that experience or
No,
if
I
you
haven't.
ever thought about it. Yeah.
No, it's not something that's ever. I don't have a strong artistic background, and I didn't grow
Hmm.
up similar to you. I didn't grow up in an environment where art was commonplace. So I'm learning. I'm learning all of this as I go.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a great way. It's a great way to see ourselves different and get in touch with ourselves in a way. Whenever I have some free time that I wanna like spend in like without because we usually like we don't have free time anymore, right? We're always glued to our phones and stuff like this. If we have free time, we're on Twitter, especially if you have to sell work now, in the NFT space and stuff, and show and so on, and participate in spaces and all that. And but when I want to like really disconnect, I try to go somewhere where I can be nude, even if I'm like by myself, or even if I'm inside or outside. Of course, for me, it's easy to say I've been working with this for a long time, but I really suggest everybody to try it, especially if you think that you're going to be discomfortable with being nude, and just go do the things. If you can just go do the things that you do normally, whether you're going to cook, or you're going to be in a Twitter space, or you're going to like do some creative work, whatever. Try to do it naked. It's going to be a different experience already, and it may make you see things a little bit different. It's something that I challenge people to experiment.
And I think it's really important because people facing fears that they have is obviously such an invigorating way to overcome them. And I
Yeah.
think what's interesting about this is it's a fear that people have subconsciously. It's not one they actively know that they have. And you had a very interesting quote before on why you thought that clothing is used as a layer of communication.
Mm-hmm.
What did
Mm-hmm.
you mean? What did you
Yeah.
mean by that?
When we are closed, it's like right now I'm wearing this because it's cold here in São Paulo. It's the winter here, right? So we don't have heating in our homes. Yeah, I don't know how it is in Australia if you normally have heating, but we don't have heating here. So when it's cold, it's really cold also inside. So unfortunately, I have to be dressed like this inside my place. But going back to it, I think mostly, especially like in this age that we live in, clothes with fashion and everything, clothes become a layer of communication. It not just like hides who we are in essence in terms of our physical selves, but it also like adds a different layer. Clothes are used as a symbol of status, as a symbol of differentiation between different cultures and different tribes and different like social statuses. And when we're stripped of that, we find out that we are all different, but at the same time so similar, so equal, you know? So taking off the clothes in most circumstances is like taking off these layers of how can I say this in English? Oh my God, like this the posh part of language, you know, the part of language that serves to differentiate also like people. You have, just like with language, you have the official like norm of language, and then you have the slangs and you have the different dialects and stuff, you know. This also serves as a differentiator. So that's the metaphor there. If you take all that out, everybody's really speaking the same language, everybody's equal. How can you differentiate, you know? How can you take, it's a way of taking off the social history and the cultural history and realizing that we're all the same. And this is a very dangerous idea. The fact that we're all like skin and bones and hair is a very dangerous idea, you know, because the systems that we have in place, they require us to consider ourselves naturally different. But no, we're not naturally different. We're all the same species. We're all the same kind of DNA, you know.
This is where
we're all much more similar. And yeah, so
it's where it becomes really, really interesting for me for Web3 in general, because people can choose whether to be doxed or undoxed, anonymous or not anonymous. And what that does for me is it frees them of the typical judgment of society and the labels that brings. So in exact the way you're talking about age, sexual preference, sex, height, things like height, skin color, status, they're all removed and behind a PFP. So I've got some really close friends that I have zero idea what they look like. I have never spoken to them on a voice call, and I probably speak to them 80% more than my quote unquote real life friends. And there's something beautiful about that, because I am judging that person on the value that they bring to my life as opposed to any other metric.
mm-hmm.
So it's something about Web3 that it transfers to what you're saying as well, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful ideal. I think there are limitations to how much that can actually like apply. You can, like with Web3 and the metaverse, you sort of can project an identity that you build yourself, and is not like it's completely independent from your social history, your geographical origin, your ethnical origin, or whatever. It's a beautiful possibility. At the same time, there are limitations to how that can apply. And yeah, I think it's a promising field in terms of that. It doesn't, I just don't think it solves all the problems, you know, because to have to project a pseudonymous identity, to be able to not be judged for your origins, is not a final perfect solution. Like we shouldn't have to project a pseudonymous identity to be able to be free of judgment based on where you're from, you know, and not what you do. So it's an interesting possibility. It's a possibility of empowerment, but it's not going to solve everything. We need to overcome that and still like be able to be ourselves, you know, to be naked. Yeah,
I think I don't have my final answer to this. It's a topic that I'm still learning and trying to figure out where I stand on it. But I think where I am currently is that people shouldn't be judged on non-chosen identity methods. So where you are born, for example, sexual preference is probably another really good example, color of your skin, So any of these non-chosen societal labels, I am starting to feel more and more strongly that people should never be judged on those.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's exactly that. Maybe the fact that we can have a pseudonymous identity and not be judged by those things is a way to get to a place in a world where we can come back to being who we are and being born in that place or having that skin color or whatever and still not be judged. That's where we have to get to, not having to use a pseudonymous identity to hide who we are, but just like really be able to be who we are and not be judged for that. And like, especially coming from a background and a circle of people in a community of queer people who are heavily judged about, who they are as a person and how they express their gender and their identity. We are, as queer people, used to having to hide ourselves and how we express and how we behave in public, in order not to be discriminated, in order not to be accepted. So that's something that we know how to do. It's no wonder why there are a lot of queer creators thriving in the Web3 space, and also like thriving as artists, because this will and this drive to express ourselves, is something that is required of us to survive. So that's something that we know how to do very well. It still is a burden, especially as I see it, as an artist who has discovered that putting myself out there just as I am and just how I think is a central part of what I do, and the kind of examples that I want to set in terms of letting people know that they can be themselves. They shouldn't have to hide, and etc. That's the reason why I personally, of course, don't think that I would hide myself behind a pseudonymous. Like my own thing is about complete honesty and how honesty can be so powerful. So I love the fact that we have this new tool that protects people who need protection from this kind of discrimination. Yes, but I still think we have to set our sights forward, to a future where we don't have necessarily to hide ourselves to be accepted.
And that where I get even more confused on top of that is, so we're in general terms, we're talking about non-chosen labels. Where I am kind of confused with myself and still having an internal dialogue is the balance between empathy and accountability for chosen labels. So if I can give you an example, if someone is racist, they may be part of racist groups, racist dialogue. There's an accountability piece because they should be held accountable for those actions. But then there's an empathy piece inside of me that thinks, how has that person ended up being that way? And 9 times out of 10, it's been through a consequence of their environment. So I struggle with myself sometimes to understand where the line of empathy ends and accountability begins, and vice versa. And it's something I don't know the answer to.
If you learn the answer, let me know.
Yeah, I'll give you a shout.
It's
I'll
a really tough one.
Yeah,
Totally. Totally. We see that with the conservative, phenomenon, the traditionalists, and then the right-wing movements, that like the extreme right-wing movements that are like rising everywhere around the world. And you see people who are like active promoters of that line of thought, and you can see on some cases that are people who really like clearly have an agenda behind that, why they do that. But there's a huge part of the population who has just been led to believe those ideas, and to really look at themselves as victims and not as the ones who are hurting others with their thoughts and with their actions. So yeah, how do you is it possible to actually draw a line, and how do you deal with these different people, who act like that for all the different reasons? You can't just put everything on the same bag and throw it out. Here in Brazil, we 4 years ago we elected like this demon for president here, on top of an absurd narrative that he was actually like the good guy, and like, and we've seen my mother, for example, my father was in the military. He's retired. He's ill now, but most of her friends are the wives of other of his colleagues from the Air Force, and she basically lost all her friends because she was the only one who was not supportive of this new, like, quasi dictatorship that we had installed here in Brazil, and she lost all her friends due to that, and due to that line of thought that they carried, and it's a very difficult topic, that one, because you can't just, like, we more than half of the voters actually elected that guy, and luckily this was like, not just luckily, but with a lot of effort, this was reverted this last election right now. But what do you do? Can you just, like, disregard and throw out that half of the country that has been led to think that way, and to think that was actually, like, good for them, so it's super complicated.
And it ties into what you've written about before in terms of necropolitics. Now, I'm going to
Hmm.
admit that I went straight to Google and typed what is necropolitics. But it gave me an interesting description. So it said necropolitics is a framework that illuminates how governments assign differential value to human life. The closer you are to dominant power, the more your life is worth. In the United States, if you're a straight, white, able-bodied, cisgender, wealthy Christian man, that's great news for you. But the further you are from those axes of privilege, the less your life is worth under the logics of necropolitics, and the more precarious your existence becomes.
Exactly. You're dispensable or not, depending on those factors. And coming back to what we were saying before, these are not things that you chose. These are not based on your actions in life, So yeah, we've seen exactly that. That's the example of the prime example of state necropolitics that was operating here in Brazil with this government. That guy, I don't want to go too much into this, so that we can still come back to art. But that president that we had here rejected offers for buying vaccines for the people in Brazil during the pandemic, because he wanted to make a shady deal with a shady Indian company to import their own vaccine, which wasn't even tested or anything. So, like, he refused the vaccines from the official, like, laboratories and companies that were already starting to distribute vaccines around the world. He refused that, and he delayed the vaccines coming to Brazil for 6 months, and hundreds of thousands of more people died because of that, because of that delay that he did in order to enrich some of his friends that had deals with those shady companies from somewhere else. And this is necropolitics really put in practice, as a clear example of, like, okay, this is the people that belong to the let including, like, his kind of politics was about putting Brazil back in the place of subordination to places like the United States. This guy was licking the boots of Donald Trump, you know, and it's his own fucking country. you know,
It's something we've seen across
let's put it back in
men.
the position of third world and be subjugated and stuff like this. And for this, we need higher unemployment. For this, we need lower wages. And for this, we need to just become like a consumer market for imported goods from industrialized countries and all this kind of shit. And it's about killing. We come to the point of killing our own population in order to sustain whatever crazy ideas that we have about who's entitled and who's not. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about this sort of stuff online, offline, because I love it. But just going back to the art piece, how did you end up becoming part of the memes?
Okay, so yeah, when I joined the NFT space in 2021, when I discovered NFTs, that was a little bit after the big Beeple sale, that made the news all around many times. So I had at the time several people coming to me and showing me these news and telling me about it. And I thought it all was like super interesting. I had very little contact with crypto before that, and but I really dived in. I think we were in the middle of the pandemic, so things were still a little bit confusing, a little bit slow on the real life front of things. We had not come back with the real life events at my cultural spaces. So it was really a good time for me to dive in and explore the promising part of the technology. And as soon as 6529 sprung up with his first GM on Twitter, I was there and I was soaking up all the tweet storms and stuff from the beginning. Yeah, so it's actually a very similar story to what Apocalypse said on the previous episode here. I was there when Punk 6529 made the open call for GM variations, GM rememes, and he bought one of the GM rememes that I made at the time. So that's when that was actually my first NFT sale. So I had some other NFTs minted, but I hadn't sold anything until then. So my first NFT sale was this GM made for by commission from Punk 6529. And when he started with the memes in the next year, I was super hooked to his idea of open metaverse and everything. And I think a little bit after the memes started minting and I was already collecting the memes, I had this idea that I had been brewing on my mind for a long time to create a work inspired by a little bit also inspired by Spencer Tunick's collective nude photograph works that he's been doing all around the world. I don't know if you've seen his works. He has some very beautiful pieces made in Australia as well. You should look him up, Spencer Tunick. And so he gets like tens or hundreds or even thousands of naked people in iconic places for photo shoots, always with a social message to send as well. And I wanted to replicate that back here in Sao Paulo. And another subject that was starting at the time to become really strong was AI and generative art and all this. So I wanted to bring a little bit of all that into this like mix of Web3 icons and elements and themes and subjects into a piece. So it's a little bit of a performance art piece because everything was very little rehearsed. I went to the place and I knew the kind of shot that I wanted. So what I did was, and also it came from an idea that I made a photograph for an obscure DAO project, which is called The World Today. That's also an interesting project if anybody wants to look it up. There was a 1955 exhibition of art, photography, organized by the MoMA, curated by Edward Steichen. And it was really interesting because it had, I think it was 200 photographers or maybe 50 photographers. I'm not sure right now, but he had photographers from all over the world photographing what's called the Family of Man. So that's the name of the exhibitions. They were photographing around the world, but today you can make a critique about that because it was a lot of this like colonialist, like white regard over indigenous cultures and stuff like this. So there's a critique to be made, but that at the time was like a huge accomplishment to make a collection of photographs that depicted the family life all throughout the world. So Obscura set out to do a project that makes a nod to the family of man, but instead like giving complete creative freedom for photographers from a very diverse backgrounds to photograph like a snapshot in time of the world today. So that's the name of the collection. And I was part of it. It was super interesting to make. There were 138 photographers that made 100 photographs each. So that's like 13,800 photographs in a big photography collection. Like it's sort of, it was an attempt to bridge the worlds of 10K PFP projects and one-on-one photography. It's a huge project. It's very interesting. It was not very commercially successful because differently from PFPs, when you have like 13,000 one-on-one photography, how do you understand that collection? How do you understand what it is about? You know, when you look at a CryptoPunk, you can look at one and you kind of understand you understand the entire collection. But when you have 138 different photographers doing work for one like huge collection like this, it's more complicated than that. But anyway, one of the photos that I did for that project was a drone photograph shot from above, and it was actually, it's a self-portrait because it was myself on top of a building with big words like help written. So I'm nude and I'm laying down in fetal position, and there's the big words help written on top, and I'm like shouting help towards the sky. And that scene was really, really beautiful. And I had the idea of shooting that with a lot of people, but with film, not just a static image. And I put all these ideas together and came up with OM letters that changed the GM and back to OM. So that's what I wanted to create on top of that building. So I set out an open call for people to participate. I got more than 60 people to come out and take off their clothes on top of a building under a very scorching sun. It was so hot that day. And we all painted, we all had body paint, so everybody painted themselves. It was really fun, but we also discovered that like white paint is a good sunblock, but red paint is not. So everybody had burns on their bodies afterward, just on one side, because people were painted red in front and white in the back.
I like that they'll
And,
take the red paint off, but still be equally red.
Exactly, that's what happened. And so yeah, that's how it happened. I had this idea, so I went and I sent 6529 an example of how that drone shot would be, just to have a visual idea of what I had in mind. And I told him I want to put like that much of like tens of naked people and doing like a GM dance and stuff like this. And he was instantly hooked to the idea, and he said, just go and do it. Let's do it. I was already in DMs with him for a brief time because of the early meme cards that we exchanged. We had to exchange DMs to get into the allow list and stuff in the beginning of the memes. So he had also collected like that GM earlier from me. So we had this contact before. And when I sent him the idea, I didn't get any answer for a couple of days. And 2 days later, he said, "Hey, I love the idea. I'm gonna put you in touch with 6529 Antiques on Discord so we can make it happen." So that's how it happened. From the moment when I told him about it, I spent 1 month organizing and sending out the open call and getting people onboarded. And the great thing about it was that when I got the people on that roof, I gave everybody like a 10-minute speech about what the hell they were doing there and what does this mean, what's this GM thing and OM and stuff. And like I did a 10-minute crash course throughout all the 6529 tweet storms, and the people loved it. In the end, I requested for a part of the supply for the meme card to not be sold, but instead of selling it, to airdrop to all the people who participated. So we airdropped 60 of the meme cards to every participant in the meme card. Later, I gave a course about NFTs, and I invited everybody to participate in this course. Some of them went on to become NFT artists. Some of them went on to sell the meme card at different points in time, at different levels of profit. But most of them are still holding, and so it's really nice to have been able to use the meme cards as a Kickstarter for a community around NFT art here in Sao Paulo.
Such a great story, and it comes across in the piece. It seems complex. It looks logistically difficult to organize, and I don't think people, when they first glance at it, realize what has gone into it. But hopefully, if they listen to this, they go back and have a look at it. You'll see how much work has gone into it.
Yeah. It's I think everything worked so well on that day because it could have gone wrong in so many different ways, but everything worked so well. I think I like the little things that I thought about in terms of preparing, everything worked so well. Like I went to that roof one day before it started, and I marked some places on the floor there where like this is the GM, so this is the point of the AM and etc. So I thank a lot those people who were there because they were like patient and could listen and then and follow instructions and stuff like this. And everything worked out so well, just like I planned. It could have gone wrong, but in the end, we got some spare time because we did the main thing was like the transformations from GM to OM. We shot it a few times from different like heights with different drone movements and stuff like this. But in the end, we had some free time, so we decided to like play some games. So that's the small insert that we have in the piece where people like are randomly creating different shapes. Like that's how the human intelligence generated part of the NFT comes from, because we were kind of like I was giving instructions to people to just like I gave them like an algorithm, like you can only do two kinds of things. You can either like get in groups of people together. If you don't find a group in 3 seconds, you have to lay down on the floor, whatever you are, turn with your belly up or with your back down. So with these sets of instructions, I was saying like stop, go, stop, go, and people were creating different shapes. So that's my generative art experiments with human intelligence. So that's where the name comes from, and we thought it was interesting to just like put an insert of that game that we were playing that in the middle of the piece. It's an interesting experiment. I had some ideas of trying to like go further into this type of generative art made by human intelligence instead of computer algorithms, because that's also something that we do so much in theater. These kind of games that we do for learning improvisation, for learning like to be smart and paying attention to your surroundings and stuff like this. This is human intelligence, but not from a place of thought, but from a place of instinct, of given a set of instructions, improvise using your instincts. You don't have time to think about it, just like the computer is not really thinking when you give him an algorithm for generative art. It's following instructions and using a randomization for different outcomes. This can be replicated, of course, with limitations, but this can be replicated by humans as well. And I think this is pretty fucking interesting.
Man, I am very excited to see where that goes. But listen, thank you so much for your time today. This has been such an interesting chat, and I hope that we'll continue to be friends and one day have a beer in Brazil.
I hope so. I really hope so. It's been amazing. Yeah, it's a great chat.
Thank you. Awesome. Well, have a great night, Hugo, and obrigado.
Obrigado. You too. Have a great night. Yeah, yeah.
See you, buddy.
Bye.